Hello, and welcome back to the Wall Facer podcast. Today's guest is Michael Bentley, the co-founder and CEO of Euler Labs. The Euler protocol is a modular lending platform that enables users to lend, borrow, and build without limits. Euler has seen incredible growth over the last few months, quickly growing from less than 10 million in lender TVL at the beginning of November to now over 100 million. Michael, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Yeah, it's great to be here.
Yeah, great to have you, and fun to just do a little background chat on Eastern European engineering practices right before we started recording.
Yeah, definitely.
Well, I guess actually speaking of that, and just since we were talking about kind of academia in Europe, I believe you were really an academic, like doing your PhD and doing postdoc research before getting into crypto in 2020.
Yeah, I was.
Yeah, what were you studying, and what was it that attracted you about DeFi, lending, and everything you're working on today?
So I used to be a bit of a jack of all trades. I used to work at the interface of maths, computer science, and biology. Really, I suppose I was an evolutionary theorist. I used to make models of populations of things and how they interact, particularly in the context of sort of strategic situations where some of the entities in a population are sort of would regard as cooperating, and other entities in the population would be regarding as competing, and then trying to solve the system to see what happens over the long term, especially when the entities can also evolve and adapt their strategies within the system. So I'd study things like antibiotic resistance evolution, the spread of cancer within a body, invasion of non-native species. So I used to study invasion of non-native species of hornets across Europe. All sorts of interesting, weird biological phenomena, but using computer science and maths to bring the models to life.
Were these theoretical practices like the cancer spreading example that you mentioned, or are these things that actually you can kind of put into practice, or you're trying to build ideas from one discipline and sort of port it over to another discipline?
I did a little bit of both. So there's I was for me I was most interested in the more abstract stuff, like trying to solve how does natural selection and evolution end up finding solutions where things tend towards cooperation. That was one thing that was really interesting for me. That's way more theoretical and hard to test, right? Because you're looking typically at millions and millions of years of evolution. So thinking about why is cancer not more common? How did multicellularity evolve as a phenomenon? We went from cells living individually, just individual cells in competition with other individual cells, and then one day a bunch of cells started to group together and band together and say, no, we're going to compete as a multicellular body, and asking those kind of bigger picture questions. That was the stuff I was really, really interested in. So how did multicellularity evolve? How does it protect itself from invasion from within and external invasion from um, yeah entities migrating into a system? But I did a lot of work in on practical, more applied stuff as well. So my last job before I came into crypto was used to work in the biochemistry department in Oxford, and there we were looking more at the microbiome, and so collections of bacteria and other microorganisms inside the gut, and how they respond to different environmental conditions and how they change over time and all the rest of it. So that was much more applied. I would work alongside teams of biologists who were working in a lab doing experiments and that kind of thing. So I'd work with data a lot as well, also doing a lot of statistics. So yeah, I was really a jack of all trades,
Oh, very
academic.
cool. I will. I'll save a bunch of those follow-ups because we'll derail way too much off crypto. But maybe just one
Yeah, yeah,
is, the microbiome actually is a very kind of hot area of health influencers today, trying to figure out how to
yeah,
optimize that. There's lots of technology or startups that are kind of in that field as well.
yeah.
As someone who's actually studied the microbiome, any 101 level tips of what people can do
I
for
think,
gut health?
well, back when I was doing it, honestly, I still felt like it was very poorly understood still. And so, yeah, there was lots of weird results coming out about how you could stabilize microbiome and how it would become destabilized in certain contexts. That was actually the kind of thing we were looking at. I was trying to trying to establish like when is the microbiome stable? You have thousands of species of bacteria living inside a microbiome, but you have dominant communities of just, I can't actually remember all the stuff now, but maybe like say 20 dominant communities of different species. effectively, and what's keeping that stable? I mean, usually you'd imagine when things compete, like one is just going to compete and outcompete everybody else. Why do you not have just one dominant species of bacteria in yogurt? Well, how does it differ from person to person? Is it influenced by diet? But we all have very variable diets. You eat just very different things from day to day, right? So it turns out it is relatively stable day to day. Part of it may be to do with genetics. It may even be inherited partially, but it turns out also if you go move continent, go to somewhere with a very different local environment, then your microbiome can be thrown out of sync essentially and completely change course, and then it can sometimes stabilize on a totally different set of bacteria inside your gut. And yeah, there's lots of interesting consequences of that. People are speculating that it can even influence things like mental health, because all these
Yes.
bacteria that live inside your gut, they're all releasing their own stuff, trying to break down food, trying to compete, and all those chemicals that are releasing there, they ultimately influence how your own health, and yeah, so it's a very interesting area, but still very poorly understood as far as I'm aware.
Yeah, most of the stuff I see it often get accused as kind of like pseudoscience, but
Mm,
I mean, at the same time, I definitely am a pseudoscience believer. I love all of the bro science and stuff, so
yeah,
I try to study my and just be more conscious of sort of the things I consume as well. But all right, let's
yeah,
get off of that.
we digress.
Yeah, we digress. So your story into crypto, is it some
Yeah.
clean story where you were studying these adversarial environments and you came across DeFi and here it is, or what was your first touch point with crypto and DeFi and all these things?
So yeah, when I was trying to finish my PhD in 2015, I used to go to lunch with a guy, and we used to think about, oh, what should we do next, And the option obviously was to go to start. What I really wanted to do, I think, was to stay in science and sit in my ivory tower doing work on a blackboard all day. But there was the temptation to see if we could do something interesting, and yeah, we were actually trying to build bots to do trading on something called Betfair. For people who know this, it's like a betting exchange. It's popular in Europe, so we're trying to think like, can we build trading bots that will trade on Betfair? And during the course of those sort of like that side quest, he introduced Ethereum, which initially I just didn't get at all. I have to be honest. I thought it sounded like a very slow, expensive, boring kind of database type project rather than anything too exciting. So we talked about that for a little while, and then I discarded the idea. And then yeah, we never, of course, our side quest never went anywhere. We were building like neural networks, sort of trading things to, work on exchanges. And so, yeah, it went nowhere. And then a couple of years later, in 2017, the bull market started. For people who were around back then, one of the big Bitcoin moves happened back then, and like Bitcoin Cash was like forming and all the rest of that craziness as well. I got sort of suckered back in to actually use those trading bots. I started to try and build trading engines for crypto markets. I was using them on things like IDEX and Ether Delta and some of the really early decentralized exchanges. And then yeah, and then just stuck around after that. I never really wanted to work in the industry full time. I enjoyed my career in science. But yeah, I just stuck around, started doing hackathon competitions. I used to like run nodes or participate in various ways in hackathons, doing little side quests effectively in my spare time. And then yeah, 2020 hit, and one of those hackathons, I met my co-founder Doug, who's a very good computer scientist, and we decided to partner effectively and start working on what eventually would become Euler. So yeah, idea to create permissionless lending markets, and I was working at the time on something on interest rate models, applying a branch of maths called control theory to interest rate models, seeing if you could set interest rates in a more decentralized way by using control theory. And yeah, then we got suckered in, and there was the pandemic raging at the time, and but we ended up winning the hackathon, and that helped attract interest from venture capital, and that's how we got started.
Wow, very cool. So, what was the time period of meeting your co-founder, deciding you guys wanted to do it, and then actually like I guess the hackathon and all that, like very
Months,
quick? Okay.
just yeah, a few months really. I mean, maybe like 4 or 5 months, something like that. I mean, yeah, it wasn't too long, and I didn't actually end up meeting Doug for probably another year after we'd started the project, because he's not, he lives in a different country. We yeah, we couldn't travel, of course, due to the pandemic and all the rest of it. And then I think the first opportunity we had to meet was it in Europe? I can't remember where we met the first time, but yeah, it took quite a while for us to get together, honestly. So the team was very small for the first year, but that's the origin story.
Nice, very cool. Hi, this is Ryan, host of the Wallfacer podcast. I want to tell you about our latest product that we think will change how you interact with DeFi. Managing DeFi positions across protocols is complicated. That's why we built vaults.fyi, a single, clean interface for accessing top protocols like Aave, Compound, Morpho, Euler, Lido, and many more across major networks. No wrappers, no extra contracts, just direct access to the best yields with real-time analytics. If you've gotten any value from this podcast, please try it out at vaults.fyi. The link's in the podcast description, and my DMs are open on X and Farcaster. I read every piece of feedback. Now, back to the show. So, as I'm guessing most people will know, Euler 2020 time period grew a lot, had a giant hack that everyone knows about and has probably familiar with. You wrote a great blog post recapping it called War and Peace.
Yeah.
Don't want to spend the whole conversation talking about that because I think everyone asks you about that and it must be boring at this point. But
Yeah.
there were a few things actually on a more positive note, I guess, that stuck out to me rereading that post that I wanted to ask you about. One was about the team that you had built around that time. And, there's the one quote in the article that said, one team member told you, I'm not going anywhere until we find him, being the hacker. It seemed like you had a lot of commitment from the team and had built these really awesome people to work on the first version of Euler. What do you think got them so excited? What created that commitment and loyalty? What do you think back from some of that on that time?
Well, they'd have to probably give you their version of why they decided to stick around. I like to think, I mean, I'll tell you how we run the team, and maybe that influences things. I mean, we have internally a really open team. But it's very flat. There's not too much hierarchy to things. So I like to, coming from academia, I like to encourage everyone to have an opinion, to be able to debate anybody else. Like this, I don't believe that anyone has a sort of privileged role within Euler. Obviously, someone has to be a decision maker at the end of the day. You don't want everyone to just get stuck, but I want people to have an opinion, to try to express it, to debate it, feel comfortable challenging me or any other seemingly senior person within the company. And try to run things. And I mean, I sort of don't know any different, I suppose, than coming from spending so many years in academia. That's kind of how we ran things there. Remember in the early days, when I was doing my PhD, I'd only been in the lab I was in for a few weeks. I was asked to give a presentation on what I was planning to do for my PhD for the next 4 years. And I gave this talk, and I was literally on slide 2, and one of the senior postdocs in the lab just started tearing it to pieces publicly in front of the rest of the people in the lab. I was like, wow, this is going to be a long 4 years. This is tough.
Yeah.
And he took me to lunch afterwards. And he was like, "I'm sorry, it's so harsh on you, but he said we need to have an environment where it's very open, so that you can test ideas and we can be really critical among ourselves, because we're your friends, right? We want you to get the best that we can out of you and for yourself. To have that challenging environment here, it's great, because then when you finally go out to the really the big bad world out there, you don't want to have spent time being, having everything nice and friendly, and so you've made mistakes or left, ideas not fully explored, because that's yeah. You want everything fully tested within this friendly environment. So because there's real adversaries out there. So he said that's kind of how we run things here, and I really liked that. I thought it was a really nice way to work. Where you work, you not afraid to challenge and be challenged and all the rest of it. So that's kind of how we run things at Euler. And we're friends, but we challenge each other, and it seems like people enjoy that as a working environment. That helps, I think, build that spirit.
Yeah, I was going to ask how you, kind of think about building the team today, but maybe a better version of that question would be, how do you screen for some of those characteristics when you're hiring people? How do you screen for that open-mindedness, healthy ability to debate? How do you find that in the people you hire?
You kind of can tell just in interviews, I think. What would I say is the what am I actually looking for when we do an interview? I guess I don't we don't do specific tests. I like to just chat to I like to chat to people. And really try to spend a few hours. We sort of typically when we do interviews, we'll do at least three different interviews with different people from the team, and we do have a little bit of structure, but we're also very happy to let things just go off on tangents, and you just chat to somebody and really drill down into like weird topics, and test their ability um, to kind of go deep on things and see, what was a challenging thing you've worked on and explain it, and then you just keep pushing and pushing and pushing and test their limits and see, do they actually know? Because one of the things about interviews that I always find peculiar is that it's very easy if you're motivated to kind of train yourself to answer the standard questions, right? And that's like actually like the worst thing you want to screen for is somebody that's just prepared really well for the standard questions that often don't make the best employees. So you want to just disarm people, make it casual, and then just have a conversation. You see, like, well, if we were to have a similar type of conversation about a topic for development in Euler, how would that look like? That's really what we're trying to replicate. What would if we were building something at Euler, let's try and just have this kind of conversation, very informal, and see where we end up. And if those conversations go well over a few different interviews with different team members, then that's usually a good sign that they would fit within the working environment first and foremost.
Nice.
But yeah, you have to be technically strong as well. We do look for that, and I like to have a team of senior people. We try not to hire too many junior people. Frankly, I believe in having in this environment, having a smaller team, but where everyone takes responsibility and everyone's able to kind of work independently.
Right. Makes sense. Makes sense. Okay. Well, before we transition to some of the details here around the
Yeah.
current state of Euler, one last question I had was, following the hack, I think, the money was eventually returned, maybe with a bit extra, just given the move in asset
Yeah,
prices, if I remember correctly.
that's right. Yeah.
I think a lot of people would have said, okay, the Euler team has done right by everybody. Maybe they just want to, call it a day. What convinced or motivated you, one, to keep going through what was this just, insane event, and then two, really ship a completely new version of the protocol that, people are now getting excited about?
Yeah, I mean, I'm sort of a believer in trying to be sort of ultra rational about things. I mean, when something happens like that, it really, your emotions are running high, and it's important to listen to those. So we when once the recovery was complete, we gave everyone some time to restore themselves, and then we came back and discussed it and said, look, ultimately, if that hadn't have happened, if you're just starting now, if there's a completely independent event, would we with this team want to build together and try and build something together, right? And the answer was, and in this industry, knowing full well that there's all the risks involved, and the answer was yes. And so, in some sense, yeah, just trying to detach what happened from what will happen in the future. I mean, they're kind of different. They're independent events in some sense. I think it's important to highlight as well that Euler was very unlucky. Um, we'd worked really hard to secure Euler V1. It was a very heavily audited protocol, even more heavily audited than a lot of the competition at the time. We had a bug bounty, much bigger bug bounty than Compound and Aave, who were much bigger protocols at the time. So yeah, there was I don't we did feel unfortunate, and we felt like we had something to prove to people. We enjoyed working together as a team, and we had lots of great ideas about how we could continue to move the industry forward as well. A lot of the influence for V2 wasn't, people, I think because of the timing of it, people assume that, oh, V2, we did that because V2 wasn't a good protocol, or, we need to tear down the code, but that's not the case. The V1 code is fantastic piece of code, really. The issue was one tiny line of code that was missing. Ultimately, that was brought about through a bug fix that was fixed a year prior. And so, yeah, the reason we decided to build V2 is because we had all these great ideas. We realized we learned a lot about how V1 worked and its limitations, frankly. Not the security limitation, but just the limitations as a product, things that we wanted to achieve. that we knew that V1 wasn't capable of. And so when we had that natural sort of pause, the choice was, do we go forward with V1, which we know is an imperfect product, or do we finally take the time to build V2 with all the improvements that we'd like to make? And so yeah, we thought it would be a nice way to kind of hit reset would be to go sit back at the drawing table with V2. Um, and yeah, let the engineers do their engineering and build something better.
That's kind of a perfect segue, actually, just to ask a very basic question of what are the big advancements of Euler V2 as compared
Yeah.
to V1?
So V1, I'd say, I mean, for people that don't know, it was I call it a monolithic lending protocol, because effectively it had lots of different assets that were all connected to one another in some sense through a collateral factor or loan to value parameter. And it was designed as a product to work in that way as a big monolith, with all the trade-off benefits and costs that monoliths come with. And so yeah, we it was a monolith that was designed to also accept long tail collateral. So we did a lot of work for people that might not remember with integrating Uniswap markets and so on. A lot of research on
Mhm.
Oracle security, that kind of thing. Um, but ultimately, we realized when as V1 was live, and there were many new different interesting asset classes onboarding into crypto, particularly like real world assets and then staked assets, yielding assets. A lot of these things really didn't exist when V1 was developed. We realized that actually you need a different lending market for different assets. You can't just bundle everything into one big monolith. It doesn't make sense from a product perspective, from a risk or reward perspective. Actually, you need a degree of fragmentation, um, because ultimately there's different risk reward trade-offs out there associated with different asset classes. And so what you really want, I think, is you need a spectrum of different types of lending products out there. And how do you create those? Well, it's hard to predict ahead of time which kinds of products you want to create, and it's yeah, do you want to build really tailored products for every single new type of market that comes on board? It's very, very difficult to do that and to predict. So what we decided instead was to actually abstract everything we'd learned about credit markets from V1 into much smaller sort of modules. And the idea is that then you could recombine those modules, you could package them back together to rebuild products of all sorts of different varieties so that you can cater to all sorts of markets and tailor them to different risk reward appetites and so on. So yeah, we boiled down everything into small components and let other people in a permissionless manner rebuild credit markets from scratch. And with V2, you can the major like at a very high level, the major sort of advancement here is that you can actually rebuild pretty much any other credit market out there that exists right now. So if you like the Morpho style of risk management and governance, you can rebuild Morpho markets. You can rebuild Compound, rebuild Silo, rebuild Aave or Euler V1. Yeah, it's really a developer's kit for developing credit markets.
Yeah, it took me as well a while to kind of fully wrap my head around that. And just credit to them. I think the first people that turned me on to some of the advancements of Euler V2 were the team over at Theia,
Yeah,
THEIA. I think they've been big advocates of you guys for quite some time now, privately.
yeah,
Um, and I've also heard you kind of describe Euler as this very primitive infrastructure now. I think maybe somewhere else you described it as almost like developer tooling versus kind of, thinking of it as like a very consumer type of product. Um, do you want to talk about some of those concepts, maybe things like EVK and EVC and some of these connectors, and like in practice, how do all of these things fit together and build new products for people?
yeah, sure. So I mean let's talk about like the primitives underpinning a credit market really. I mean, for V1 and for something like Aave, their primitive is the whole collection of vaults and their various connections and their pricing and all the rest of it. So the primitive is in the end like a kind of a fully fledged product. If you look at something like Morpho, their primitive is really a pair of vaults. So in Morpho, they have like a pair. They have one asset that's a collateral and another asset that's a debt asset. So the collateral is used to borrow from to create debt on the other vault, and it's boiled down to a pair. On Euler, the primitive is really a single asset and a single vault, and you can then create products by combining vaults into different sort of networks. So if you take a single vault and allow people to borrow from it, then you need another vault to be used as collateral. So you have a secondary vault that's used as collateral, and it's used to borrow from the lending vault. So if you just create that pair with these two primitives, you have essentially you've recreated a kind of simple morpho primitive. But if you have your lending vault, you can now choose to accept multiple types of collateral. If you do that, you end up with something very, very similar to the way that Compound works, Compound v3. You can do something interesting where you take the collateral, the lending vault and the collateral vault, and now you're going to use the lending vault as collateral for the collateral and collateral vault as collateral for the lending. So you have vice versa, right? You now allow what's called rehypothecation, where whilst you're using something as collateral, you can simultaneously lend it out to earn yield. Now, if you connect these two vaults together, then that's effectively how Silo works. A can borrow B, B can borrow A. If you now start to create multiple vaults as collateral and multiple lending vaults, and then you connect them all together, you end up with a network that looks effectively like an Aave, you're back to having a full monolithic lending market. So yeah, we have this thing called the Euler Vault Kit, which is used for deploying these individual vaults. When you deploy an individual vault, you decide what its role is. It's the debt vault that you're creating each time. So if you were to create a vault now using this Euler Vault Kit, or EVK as we call it, you deploy your vault. You'd specify which assets get deposited to that vault, and then you would say which other vaults inside the ecosystem do I want to accept as collateral for this newly deployed vault. If you just choose one vault, then you're back to Morpho. If you choose many vaults, Compound. And then if you deploy multiple vaults yourself and decide to connect them all together, that's how you end up back with your Aave kit. Now, what's important here is that role of as collateral, like what you're choosing to accept as collateral. Ultimately, you need to mediate communication between the vaults, and so for that we have this thing called the Ethereum Vault Connector, and that's the really primitive communication protocol that sits at the kind of base of the new Euler system. And it's important because it allows vaults to talk to one another and accept other vaults as collateral. Today, most of the vaults just accept other vaults using ERC20s as collateral, but it's abstracted away from any sort of opinion about what type of assets are used as collateral. It doesn't even need to know about oracles or pricing. Particularly, it's a very abstract primitive that just mediates that communication, that checks that whatever you need to use as collateral is being used in some sense in a kind of proper way. So yeah, there were those two components, and there's a third component, which is the Euler Price Oracle kit. This is built around a new ERC standard that we've helped push, and it in some sense it's the canonical standard for this Oracle ERC. And the Euler Price Oracle kit is used to deploy price oracles. It's used to connect things, pricing for vaults and the assets within those vaults, and it can work with things like Chainlink or Chronicle, Redstone, Pyth, or really any kind of pricing system you could build. You could also build it on top of some of the more decentralized price oracles from Curve or Uniswap or wherever else. So yeah, these three major modules, I suppose, you form the core of the Euler system, and they're all permissionless to use, all primitives in their own right, all extremely customizable, and with them you can create any kind of credit product, we believe.
So maybe I'm probably going to trip myself up somewhere here, but maybe I can try
Let's
and
go.
walk through just in my mind kind of a practical example just to sort of
Yeah.
illustrate this. But, Compound V3, I think is maybe an easy one to walk through, but
Yeah.
I could theoretically deploy a market on Euler that just copies the exact same LTV parameters from Compound V3's USDC market. So single USDC lend asset, these 5 or 6 different collaterals at different LTVs, recreate that exact same market with the same sort of capital efficiencies elements that exist from a compound or an Aave, have that market on Euler. And I think with Compound V3, most people would be happy to accept that as collateral. I think those are, battle tested, relatively safe, et cetera, et cetera. And so now within Euler, you have the same aspect where another steward on Euler could accept that asset as collateral into a new market that maybe is lending in a more risky fashion or some respect, but you have this kind of capital efficient collateral that you're working with. So in this
Yeah.
example, we've rebuilt Compound on Euler and also maybe some other type of market.
Yeah, that's right. So I guess the limitation on the compound side is that their vault wouldn't be like once that sort of collection has been created, you either use it or you don't, and that it's kind of fixed. But it can't really. It's very difficult to imbue it with any more utility. Whereas on Euler, if the thing that's earning the interest is trusted, if its collateral set is reasonable and so on, it can then itself be accepted as collateral in anybody
Right.
else's new markets that they're creating. So and that ability to communicate with that vault with other vaults is that's mediated by this primitive called the EVC. But yeah, you
Yes.
can accept other people's vaults as collateral inside your own brand new vaults. What's really nice about that is um, it helps bootstrap new markets. I mean, ultimately, the more things you're prepared to accept as collateral, the more demand for borrowing there is in principle from your vault. And what type of things make good collateral? Well, they're usually low risk things out there in the ecosystem. And so if you're out there deploying credit markets that are relatively low risk and well risk managed, they're more likely to be accepted as collateral inside other people's credit vaults. That brings them more deposits when people do use them as collateral. As they get more liquid, that makes them arguably even more useful as collateral. And so more conservative, well managed vaults tend to be used more and more and more as collateral. Um, and you get these powerful network effects in principle coming into play.
Yeah, and you're touching on something that is kind of a, I don't know, interest of mine. I remember, rest in peace to FTX, but I remember at some point that they began accepting Compound C tokens as margin collateral on the centralized exchange, and I
Yeah,
remember thinking, what a big moment that felt like for DeFi adoption. And at the time, I was working on TrueFi, so RWA protocol. And whether it was, TrueFi, Maple, Centrifuge, all these different Goldfinch RWA protocols, we always struggled because no one would accept the assets as collateral. And so even if the yields were pretty high, it was really inefficient in that you couldn't do anything after that. You could just lend and that's it. But crypto people, they want leverage exposure. They want to be able to repurpose it to borrow more and, earn a higher yield, whatever that might be. So the fact that that is a kind of default aspect of an Euler configuration through the EVC is very exciting. I mean, I can see why teams would want to build within that framework.
yeah, that's right. And it really doesn't matter what you're building. You could build a fixed rate interest rate market on Euler. As long as you build your vaults in an EVC compatible way, you can guarantee that other people in the future can accept your assets as collateral. So you kind of future proof it in that way. It is unfortunate that you can build some really great products in Compound or Morpho or wherever else, and for someone else to then start accepting them as collateral would take a massive lift. Usually, it would require
Correct.
development of custom code. You need like lots of audits. Be very very expensive. And that's been happening time and time again inside DeFi. Right? We see loads of times. Oh, can I use this Yearn vault as collateral? Can I use this Curve pool as collateral? People want to be able to use these other assets which are made for viable collateral, but the actual lift just often doesn't make sense. If you get that functionality baked into the underlying system, though, and we know it's been secured by millions of dollars worth of audits and it's battle tested, it's got Lindy, then it becomes much easier to start to support those use cases over time. And we're already seeing that on Euler now. I think lots of independent third parties have started building cool things in a permissionless manner using the Vault Kit and the EVC.
Yeah. So all right, if I had to take the other side of this, it would be
Yeah,
that I guess even though, yes, I agree totally with the message kind of being laid out here, but when you look at the longer tail collaterals that are even accepted on a place like Aave, they're not often utilized as compared to just Steth and Wrap Bitcoin and basically the mega cap assets. So what changes here that people decide to start using Uniswap V3 assets more, or Yearn tickers, or whatever it is? Like what's the big change here that's going to get people to start wanting to post that as collateral, or I guess people to underwrite it as well, right? People willing to lend against these things.
yeah. I mean, no, I wouldn't say that the explosive growth on Euler is going to come from just those
Of course.
slightly more niche use cases. I think it's they're enabled because the whole kit is agnostic, right? So that helps onboard new communities to Euler and the Euler ecosystem when these niche use cases are utilized. Even if they're not bringing massive numbers in TVL, right? They can be relatively small markets. The point is that the kit and the infrastructure supports it, whatever size of market you have. And then it ultimately comes down to users and their risk tolerances. Like, do I want to lend to someone using a Yearn vault as collateral, or an LP token from Curve as collateral? Ultimately, that's a higher risk thing to do than lending against state teeth, but
Right.
perhaps comes with higher reward, right? There's what it depends what people are willing to pay and what people are willing to accept on the risk reward basis for underwriting that. So where things are important, though, and I think hopefully become more important for the long term, is with mentioned real world assets. I think people can clearly see uh, institutional growth and adoption of DeFi rails in maybe the past 6 months to a year. And as those markets continue to grow, I think it's there where it's really important that you have a very flexible kit and infrastructure that can accommodate all sorts of different irregular collateral types. Sometimes those real world assets come with restrictions, transfer restrictions. Sometimes they don't have liquid DeFi markets, don't have liquid markets inside DeFi exchanges. They have, like redemption systems through BlackRock or something slightly more irregular. So in those cases, it's really important that your kit is flexible and you don't have to completely reinvent the wheel and have a brand new set of audits and everything just to accommodate some kind of new real world asset. So I think that's where the big volumes will come from, in the years to come, is ultimately continued growth in the adoption of bringing TradFi on chain. That's uh,
Yeah.
that's that's why I'm most excited about it.
All right. I've got two follow-ups here, but I'll jump to the
Yeah,
RWA one for a second. So, by the way, your Twitter, it's a great place to just kind of gather some questions from you. But you
yeah,
tweeted
sure.
recently that Euler is an RWA project, by the way. You just don't
Yeah.
know it yet. And the light paper for V2 also describes these ERC20 collateral tokens. Could you expand on some of the kind of overall vision here, and how you're thinking about this uh, delegated collateral or something?
Yeah, I mean, there's long term we want to make sure that the kit supports those kind of use cases. A lot of these collaterals are irregular.
Mhm.
Like I said, they don't necessarily have massive depth in terms of liquidity on dexes. Why is that important? Well, if you typically if you liquidate crypto native assets during the liquidation process, somebody will come in and effectively take the collateral and the debt held by the borrower, and they will exchange the collateral for the debt on a DEX, and they will then repay the loan. And this will all happen atomically. So you need that liquidity in those markets. For real world assets, there are often blockers, which mean that isn't possible. to do directly. So sometimes there will be secondary transfer restrictions that arise from compliance requirements or other sort of like requirements in the system, which mean that there aren't liquid secondary markets for the assets. In that case, you need to be able to handle redemptions of the assets in a different way. There might be redemption delays that need to be accounted for. So Euler supports those out of the box effectively. It has hooks on side of the vaults, which allow you to go away and do additional things. You're essentially able to wrap around the ordinary core actions on that you would take on a lending protocol with additional additional functionality to them, additional checks and balances, which mean that um, you can comply with the requirements of the underlying assets and do handle all the irregularities as well. So that's the kind of vision really is we don't know what all the requirements will be for these underlying real world assets, but we want to have a system that's flexible enough to accommodate them. And you see that with Ola today. We've got a few markets on there already, which are real world asset markets. So the team at Midas, which is a European real world asset project, they have some interesting real world assets listed on Euler today, which have some of these irregular features. And they've been operating very successfully so far. And I think we'll see continued growth of that side of the industry in the years to come. It's maybe not the hot thing at the moment because interest rates have been higher in the bull market in crypto right now than they are in a lot of the assets, a lot of the real world assets, which at the moment tend to be focused on treasuries.
Yes.
But as sort of as we move through different phases of the cycle in crypto, I think we'll start to see real world assets in various different forms, whether it's forex or bonds or tokenized stocks, maybe. There'll be all sorts of these weird and wonderful things coming on chain, and the key thing is that Euler's there ready to accommodate them when those markets become more popular.
Yeah, no, I think it's probably very underrated, some of these like structural, institutional type of features. And when I was reading about the ERC20 collateral tokens, I was reminded maybe about year and a half ago, Compound published this blog post about this idea called encumber.
Yeah,
And the idea was that if you held funds at Anchorage, you could essentially encumber or delegate that to a compound market as collateral without actually having to take the assets out of your custodian. And I think it's
yeah,
probably underrated that there are giant funds that operate in the space that might want to borrow in DeFi, but have a mandate that their funds have to sit in a qualified custodian. And so some
yeah.
of these things, I think, as long as you can work with the respective custodian in these cases, you can really expand the pie of people who are able to borrow from these different markets. So I was very excited when I
Yeah,
saw that.
yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's lots of cases like this. I think it's important to remember that these institutions just move really slowly, and
Yes.
rightly so. So bringing the technology on chain, enabling the technology is one thing, but actually then creating, bringing the users on chain is another. It takes a lot of time for these use cases to start to emerge, but we are seeing that today. To be clear, I think there are more and more institutions that are either doing it now or imminently about to start doing these kind of things on chain, and they really appreciate some of the features that not just Euler but that DeFi more generally offers, the transparency and composability and all the rest of it, are massive advantages, lower costs in many cases now with L2s as well, and there's huge advantages of this for institutions. So they're here and they will continue to come here, and like I say, it's the crucial thing for us is that we're ready to accommodate them when they come.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So jumping back just to off of RWAs and onto some of these sort of markets that Euler is enabling.
Yeah,
And, something I feel like I've observed recently is that between Euler and, this is kind of true for Morpho as well, is that it seems like the modular permissionless use case has really found a user um, in terms of like new asset issuers that are trying to bootstrap a stablecoin in some way, shape, or form.
yeah,
Morpho's obviously had a lot of success with Usual, pending, ignoring the last 4 or 5 days with the Oracle issues.
Yeah,
And then in your case as well, Resolve has got some of the biggest markets on Euler today. I know they're very new, but M0 has got some stablecoin markets on there as well. And
yeah.
stable coins or pegged asset issuers, maybe more than anyone else, require this kind of wide adoption and seek this, I think, more than just a normal token issuer. So rather than, I think what I'm trying to get at is when people say long tail assets, I feel like they tend to think of like meme coins and number 200 on coin market cap. But the
Yeah.
reality is that they're more these kind of stable coin type of assets. Would you agree with that framing? And like, is that an intentional thing that you're kind of seeking out, or it's just happened that way?
I think no, I think that's exactly right. Yeah, when people talk about the long tail, they definitely sort of imagine I don't know, yeah, dubious
Yeah.
dubious meme coins, or even at the best, like sort of blue chip DeFi tokens can be considered quite long tail. Take a
Chainlink or something, right?
say
I
like
mean,
yeah, a lot of people would consider that like long tail, and but you're right that there's been this explosion of new stable coins, and one can see why that's happened, right? I mean, Tether's arguably one of the most sort of profitable companies in the world,
yeah,
operating with very few people, and people want to compete, right? They want to say, well, Tether's making so much money, Circle making quite a lot of money as well. Can we compete with that? And so the way that they're doing this is, of course, those issuers are essentially providing non-yielding stable coins on chain, and a lot of the revenues that they're generating from putting the deposits into T-bills and generating yield for themselves aren't then being directly passed back to users. And people are now thinking about various creative ways of how to pass yield back to users, to try to disrupt those two markets. So M0 and various others are doing this, and that creates a long tail of stable coins, right? Um, Similarly, I think there's been a lot of popularity with tokenizing funds, essentially tokenizing uh,
mm,
profitable off-chain trading strategies, and then essentially providing users with a stable coin, which gives them a tokenized version of a share in the fund, and those tokenized shares often are yield bearing, and that creates opportunities for leveraging the yield that you get from the assets. If you can create a money market and persuade people to lend against that with a non-yield bearing stable, then you end up having lots and lots of carry trades, or cash and carry trades in the market, where people use a yield bearing stable coin asset to borrow a non-yield bearing stable coin asset, and then they loop the position. And so that's been the story of this cycle, I would say. And whether it's with the stablecoin side of things, of course, there's also the yield bearing, incoming yield bearing Bitcoin assets, and then a little while back, LRTs and LSTs in the ETH
right.
ecosystem were popular as well. And so those trades, are kind of the story of this cycle that didn't really exist so much in previous cycles. It wasn't that common. Mostly lending markets were used to borrow a volatile thing as collateral to borrow a stable coin, and less commonly to do the opposite, right? To maybe take a short position. But usually they were used to go long Bitcoin or ETH, and now there's
Correct.
been massive proliferation of people just doing carry trades.
So, on that note, then, of kind of what people are doing when they borrow on Euler, uh, this is a conversation I kind of have with everyone when I'm trying to introduce them to crypto for the first time. The question is, well, who is willing to pay this much to borrow so that I can earn that much as a lender? And with Euler recently, specifically, we've seen very high yields across vaults.fyi. Got to get the obligatory plug-in for the episode.
Yeah.
Um, what's driving the growth of Euler yields today? Would you credit it to some of the design decisions? Is it just people are willing to borrow a lot against some of these assets? What's driving it today?
Yeah, where does the yield come from is the
There you
age-old
go.
question in DeFi. Yeah, where does
Yeah.
it come from? So the yeah, we just discussed the proliferation of carry trades, right? A lot of those assets. A
Yes.
lot of the yield is coming from newer projects. So essentially, I create a new project in crypto. Maybe it's yeah, I have some kind of stable coin or some kind of LRT, or Bitcoin or ETH LRT. Now, to grow, projects often have a governance token associated or some kind of utility token associated with it. Or maybe they don't, but they will do in the future. And ahead of time, in order to help grow, they subsidize their growth by distributing those assets to early adopters of the new technology. That happens for any new startup, right? Whether you're Uber or you're a new crypto project, right? You do some kind of subsidy for the new product that you've created, and effectively that subsidy comes in the form of a reward. In crypto, it's usually attached to the deposit of some kind of token. Now, how do I if I'm very, very excited about this hypothetical new project, how do I effectively lever up? How do I yeah, take an even bigger position? Well, the easiest way to do that is to take the new token I've got that comes with these rewards attached, and it is to effectively borrow stable coins so that I can reinvest those stable coins in more deposits. And then I can reuse these new deposits as collateral to borrow some more stable coins. So you can build a leveraged position. So ultimately, a huge amount of the yield that's being generated for the people who are depositing just the stable coins, right? They don't know about this shiny new project. They um, might not be ultra bullish the project or whatever, but they're happy to underwrite the risk of lending to borrowers using those assets as collateral, because ultimately the positions are over collateralized, and
Correct.
the more over collateralized they are, then the less risky it is to lend to those people. But the more collateral the less collateralized they are, ultimately, the less over collateralized they are, the more leverage people can build. And so, as a lender, you're sort of choosing whether or not ultimately you think the position is going to be safe, and in the event of liquidations and so on, the market's going to stay fully solvent. And but that's where the yield is coming from in a lot of cases. It's brand new projects trying to onboard users, giving out incentives, and then their users essentially are prepared to collateralize those positions and borrow at quite high rates in order, because they believe so much in the project that
Yes.
they think paying 10 or 15 or even 20% or whatever is worth it, so that they can reinvest and build an even bigger position in the brand new project that they're excited about. I would say that's where the yield comes from today. It's the emergence of these new projects with rewards and yields and so on.
Completely agree. And I guess we kind of touched on that too, talking about just the new stablecoins, new asset issuers kind of bootstrapping themselves with lending markets in these kind of new and exciting ways. But on that note of kind of points and token incentives, something I was thinking about as I was prepping for this was that Euler is itself kind of a mature token, right? You're way farther along in the distribution of the token than a younger project that's maybe trying to compete with you guys.
Yes.
Uh, but at the same time, with V2, you've kind of gone back to the ground floor and you're rebuilding a startup from very early on. So how do you think about kind of balancing that today? Like maybe you have less incentives to give, but still want to be able to be competitive with other lending markets out there.
Yeah, I think it's about being very tactical about how you continue to distribute and grow the
Yeah.
system. Euler spent today probably like just $500,000 on incentives, which is a remarkably small amount
Wow.
when you consider how much TVL has been generated off the back of that. When you take the total deposits and debts, the TVL, as measured by that metric, it hit 250 million recently. And
Nice.
so, yeah, the project's managed to get a large bang for its buck. When you compare that to the 70 million a year that Morpho's spending for its isolated pools, I think it reflects quite well. So, yeah, the current system on Mola distributes token rewards to users, but they're not direct token rewards. Ultimately, the Euler token gets locked in a smart contract that uh, allows users to claim them. They effectively unlock over a period of 6 months. So yeah, if you were to unlock the rewards after just 3 months, you get approximately half the amount that you would get if you waited the full 6 months to maturity.
Mm.
So the project, the DAOs voted or opted to use this kind of novel mechanism. It's called Reward Euler. It's attached to a lot of the markets on Euler, and yeah, helps incentivize and subsidize the cost for users who are using those vaults. And yeah, I think it's one of the really nice features of it is that it helps ultimately people will discount those rewards because they are locked. Of course, there's a time
Of course.
value of money and all the rest of it. But what it does do is it means that you're onboarding users that actually want to be there, or actually they presumably want to be there because the underlying markets are already interesting to them and have a real use case anyway. And so the subsidies are kind of just a bonus on top of existing like real demand to use the product.
Yeah.
Um, but the other reason is that the people can't just farm and dump these rewards, right? So the people that are actually accumulating them presumably have some kind of vision that they view the project as being successful over a longer time period and are happy to accept the duration risk of waiting 6 months to receive their rewards, right? So they're actually like advocates for the system already. You've not just got the very mercenary like farmers who just come in and farm them and immediately sell them. Those individuals tend not to be the kind of people that you want to grow on a product for the long term, right? They can be useful.
Right.
They have their uses, but they're not the most useful users of a platform. They're the real users, right?
Yeah, it's a good almost pre-screen or kind of counteracting force to the mercenary farmers, and hopefully it gives you some more assurance that the people using the protocol today are real users and not just a hot ball of money, essentially.
Yeah, and there will still be mercenaries, right? You
Of
can't you
course.
can't ever, but it's how do you you just a very short bit of duration can actually change the composition of the farmers quite substantially, we hope. And so we'll see how it works over the long term. But for in the short term, we've I think the community is quite happy with how the reward system has been implemented.
Yeah, so going on the topic of kind of incentivizing the right behaviors, with Euler's position today as this infrastructure for lending, are there maybe success metrics that you guys track or evaluate that would surprise us or that are different from traditional lending protocols?
I think some of the growth metrics that we've seen, but in just 3-4 months on Euler have been quite interesting. We have quite high weekly user numbers. I think I posted this like maybe a week ago or a few weeks ago about how we'd hit the same weekly user numbers as Compound has.
Hmm.
Um, and that spike I think is driven by a few things. Firstly, the UI is set up to allow people to actually do end-to-end trades. So we have a very powerful batching system on the UI. So aside from all the cool stuff with the underlying structure of the smart contracts and everything, the UI tries to reduce the frictions that lots of users have. If they want to create these loops, you can just create them like in a single click, single gas efficient click. If you want to create multiple positions, want to have 10 or 20 positions, whether you're farming somebody else's rewards or Euler rewards or you just want to have like 20 positions because you're long, short, and have this really complex trade setup. There are sub accounts which essentially allow you to isolate different positions, so you can isolate the risks and rewards of different setups, all using a single wallet, so you don't have to fund multiple wallets with different amounts of gas and all the rest of it. So I think those features help with our weekly user numbers. That's great for us, great for the projects as a whole, because it's not just about TVL, right? You actually need users at the end of the day, and not everybody's a whale. So it's about onboarding a community of people. I think as you see Euler go to multiple networks, those numbers will go up a lot because a lot of people are still priced out of using Euler because it's as of today, as of this morning, maybe we'll see something later today, but as of this morning, it's only on on ETH mainnet where it's kind of expensive to trade. So yeah, I think the permissionless nature of the markets, there's like maybe 10 to 15 different markets on Euler, and by market I refer to something that's like a collection of different vaults. Um, I think the protocol's been able to onboard new communities of people that you wouldn't obviously, if it was just me designing markets, I wouldn't obviously create a market for these things. Like one of the interesting ones is the swap protocol. That's like swap with two A's in the middle. They've
Yes.
created something for LP tokens, for swap LP tokens that has like a permissioned nature to part of the market. I don't know all the details about it because it's it was created in a permissionless manner, and they've got their own community that are now using that. I think that's really cool. Resolve has been a really big success story in Euler. They're
Yes.
one of the tokenized carry trades. That's a sort of an Athena competitor, if you will, and they permissionless creation of a market dedicated to resolve assets, and that's worked really well. There's lots of advantages with using Pendle tokens on Euler. People they've been very, very popular. There's a stable coin dedicated market. We've got Idle and Fasanara creating another permissioned market
Mm,
that's coming on board very soon that has some
cool.
really interesting features. So yeah, there's just a lot of different types of things to offer people on Euler because of its flexible nature, and I think that helps on board more users. And in the long run, it's providing people with real utility. And that's helped boost some of these metrics, like the average weekly user numbers. Even though we don't have tons of incentives or tons of TVL, it's already a very useful platform just a few months after launch.
Yeah, I mean, I think you saw my comment in your forum, but I'm very excited for you guys to start launching on L2s as well. And I
Yeah,
think you can count me more than as well as a weekly active.
yeah,
But what other question I'm just kind of pinpointing from a couple different things we've talked about here
yeah.
is so I think Gauntlet just said that they're going to start launching markets or just did launch markets. I forget, and I believe they are also the parameter tuners or risk stewards, whatever the proper word is for Compound today.
Hmm.
So, and they get paid $1 million, $2 million a year or something for doing that. But presumably Compound V3 makes a lot more in fees than 1 or 2 million. So why? And maybe the answer is it's just too early. But what's stopping them from just launching Compound V3 on Euler, as we've talked about now, as possible, with the exact same parameter tuning that they would have? Um, Keeping the entirety of or the majority of those fees for themselves? Like, what is stopping someone from doing that today?
In a technical sense, absolutely nothing really. I
Yes.
mean, truly, that's the case. I think technically, if you see a popular market on another platform, then try and replicate it and see if you can
Yep.
achieve success that way. I think there are lots of other factors though when growing a lending protocol, lots of trust assumptions that people make. Partly it comes down to branding, right? And the Lindy of a project. Compound V3 is now been out for good while. I can't remember exactly when it launched, but it's now got that Lindy effect that people really like
Right.
with lending markets, right? It's held significant volumes of deposits for a very long period of time. It's kind of starting to prove itself. It takes many years to really cement this Lindy effect, I think, and so that's one thing, right? You create something new on Euler, it needs to start building its Lindy over time. So yeah, I think the best for me, I always think the best thing is not just to copy somebody else. Like anyone can kind of do that, but yeah, it's usually the path to growth is usually by offering a trade that can't be done elsewhere. So offering some
Mm.
people something new that where there's a gap out there in the market that needs filling. And then, over the long term, maybe in 3, 4 years, when Euler has the same sort of like effective Lindy as Compound, maybe it can just compete on those boring base trades as well. Like a state to ETH to ETH looping trade. Yeah, you could build that single market on Euler, and it is useful. We know it has a massive use case in crypto. Is it the way to compete with Aave and Compound? Probably not, right? Those That's a dominant trade that's existed on Aave since the start. So I think you can do those things on Euler for sure. But yeah, if you want to do something, if you want to build on Euler today, my guess is that the best way to achieve that is to do something really like new and exciting. So there's an Apostro team. They're one of the other risk
Yep.
stewards or risk curators on Euler. Um, Definitely not got the same sort of brand name that Gauntlet does, a bit newer to market, I suppose. But they've done a fantastic job so far bringing that Resolve market to life on Euler. It hit nearly 100 million TVL for them and for Resolve. So what they identified there was we have this new project. It looks very, very promising. People are very, very excited about. Um, about Resolve, and they've created a very capital efficient structured market on Euler that you can't really create. You can't really build something quite as capital efficient on Morpho. Aave probably it's too risky for Aave. You can't do it on Compound either. So they built something that you just can't build on other platforms on Euler, and it grew very quickly overnight. And yeah, I think we'll see more risk managers starting to try to attack um, new and exciting opportunities by building in a creative manner on Euler.
Great perspective. Much more of a grow the pie type of way of looking at
Yeah,
this whole thing.
yeah,
Yeah, and on the Lindy point as well, you might have seen this, but we just rolled out our kind of first pass at a what we're calling a reliability score. So not really a risk scoring, but for the
yeah,
Pro 40 protocols that we support in hundreds and hundreds of pools, we've rolled out this framework that very much uses this Lindy mentality of ranking the individual protocols and pools by the TVL that they've held over time.
yeah,
So things like Lido, Aave, Compound are at the very top of that list, as you would expect, because they've held this large amount of TVL over time. We're
yeah,
also trying to figure out other ways to incorporate frameworks so that newer protocols like Euler and Morpho aren't as penalized just because they are always going to be younger than Aave and Lido. And
yeah,
so we've got some things in there like, distribution of holders, how many people hold at least some amount of funds, and just trying to figure out something that scales where we're not actually having to go and look at the audits of these different protocols and take in these very qualitative factors and just pure, here's all of the on-chain information and here's something you can hopefully make a decision off of. So
yeah. I think it's the audits matter most in the early days of the project in that sort of first year or so when a project's first growing and it's got substantial deposits. I think it takes time. If you think about from an adversarial mindset, what am I looking for? Well, I want a project firstly to have some assets, so I'm not going to attack it in its first few months until it's got something in there to attack and try to steal. So I wait a few months and then I start looking, right? Once it's live with deposits, and then that's where the audits really get tested. And then over time, I think that you sort of then slowly exponentially decay into a kind of proven sort of safety metric driven by, and that's where then the Lindy becomes more important. The audits that you had 3-4 years ago have much less significance to the safety of the protocol than the hundreds of millions of deposits that you've had that weren't stolen, right? And I think that's sort of how we should view these things. So yeah, if you're a brand new protocol, it really does matter that you've had spent a significant budget on audits and taken time to build things in a safe and secure manner. Obviously, Euler, we feel has done that. It's probably one of the most expensively audited protocols of all time in DeFi. Um, but yeah, hopefully as the protocol matures, it will prove itself through Lindy, not just its expensive audits. So
well
yeah, I
said.
quite agree with you.
Yeah, I'm going to borrow some of that language actually for as we publish more about our scoring. So thank you for that.
Yeah.
Well, as we're coming up to the end here, I've got kind of two last questions. First one, you've talked a lot about some of the people who are already building new types of lending markets on Euler today, and that's what you're most excited about, not just rebuilding existing protocols. Are there any sort of, product requests or call to action for people who might be thinking about how they can build Euler? What are you excited to see built on top if you've got some ideas you want to throw out there?
I think I think there's lots of cool and exciting things that I know are already kind of being built. So I don't want to spoil the party for those folks. But there's integrations with like Uniswap v4 hooks, for instance, combining DEX and lending in interesting ways. Some things that might similar kind of ideas that might be implemented by integrating Balancer and Euler. Um, Delegating credit, we sort of highlight that earlier on. I think being able to deposit have assets on Euler, use them to borrow on Aave, could be a really exciting um, idea, or vice versa. Yeah, there's
I imagine vice versa.
yeah,
I
yeah.
can't see Aave approving that one, but yeah.
Yeah, well, the nice thing is you want permissionless infrastructure that enables this whether people like it or not, right? I mean, so we'll see. But I think there's some nice ideas around that. Um, yeah, there's lots of I'd say people trying to build like we've been discussing, like things that can't really be done right now. So using irregular collateral types, or trying to collateralize things that are like slightly more awkward to typically collateralize, but which otherwise have a lot of value. So um, the Athena thing is tokenizing. Athena themselves have tokenized effectively a fund, right? They've tokenized a popular trade. There are lots of other funds out there though that have their own strategies. Athena's like a delta neutral strategy, which relies on taking a long position on spot and a short position on perps. But there are different ways to create those kinds of trades. But whether or not you can tokenize them and scale to the same size that Athena has or not, you can potentially use a tokenized deposit. Proof of the success of the fund is collateral to be able to borrow something. So there are some folks working on strategies for that, and that Euler's particularly well suited for that because of the multiple vaults that your ability to use multiple vaults as collateral and to be able to connect them to one another. You can highly customize the strategy that you use um, to set up these kind of private or partially permissioned markets. Um, yeah, and then Euler ourselves, we're looking forward to launching sometime in the future, hopefully the near future, swapping on Euler itself to help further support some of the major use cases on Euler. So there's no secret that the Euler Labs team's been working on the Euler swap protocol for some time. That'll be something that we look forward to shipping at some point in the near future.
I've seen that teased a bunch.
Yeah.
And any kind of insight into what makes it different than existing swap protocols out there today? And how should we think about that?
Yeah, I'll give a little flavor. It's different in a few ways. I think it's quite novel. Whether or not that means it will be successful, the market will decide. But it's definitely novel. It uses similar principles, I suppose. It's not structured in the same way at all, but similar sort of principles as we see on the success that Fluid's had. So the Instadat team launched Fluid, which allows people to use credit and debt on the lending protocol as liquidity in a sort of parallel swap protocol, and there's similar principles applied in Euler swap. So yeah, trying to boost capital efficiency by making sure that you don't need to segregate assets into a DEX pool and the same types of assets into a lending protocol. You can try to have a unified pool where they can be used more in a more capital efficient manner to support both use cases simultaneously. Quite a few teams have been working on that kind of thing, and we've got our own take on it, which we're excited to showcase to people. On the DEX part itself, it also introduces a brand new AMM curve to DeFi. I really like. I spent a lot of time just sort of delving through the maths of, from XY equal to K all through the stable swap stuff and curve V2. And I love that space of ideas. And obviously Uniswap has had more success with the tick-based pools, but I'm still a huge fan of having a curve on top of an exchange. I think it's extremely capital efficient to do things like that from an LP's perspective. Rather than having to constantly rebalance inside ticks. I still think one thing that people miss a lot about the good old school like a XY equal to K pools is that you can achieve a lot of capital efficiency by not forcing LPs themselves to have to rebalance all the time. So
Correct.
yeah, we've got introduced this new curve to the system as well, which has which has some really nice properties that I think other curves don't have.
Well, I am very excited to see that rolled out. And to wrap us up today, I have one last question. So you end the Euler light paper by saying that Euler aims to become the global liquidity layer and one-stop shop for lending, borrowing, and trading on EVM-based networks. Couldn't think of a better place to kind of end our interview today, but what key places still need to fall into place to fully realize that vision? What's the toughest part about that becoming a reality?
I think uh, I think I think it's the I think we have the technology here now to do it. I think it's about onboarding the right users. I think it's more about building Lindy. I think having the swapping protocol in place is a key component of that. That's where the trading bit comes into play. Um, but yeah, the technology is there for therefore I think it's about ultimately showcasing what Euler can do over showing that it's here for the foreseeable and building building the liquidity inside Euler. But I think the new types of assets that will be coming on chain over the years to come, and the new types of users, institutional clients and so on, are going to make this a reality in DeFi anyway. And I'm confident that Euler is going to be a big part of that picture, alongside the friendly competition we have with people like Aave and Morpho.
Awesome. Well, Michael, thank you for all the time today. I really enjoyed learning more about Euler. I hope all of our listeners did as well. And where can people find you, learn more about Euler, all that good stuff?
Yeah, so the app itself is at app.euler.finance. Euler spelled Euler. It's a terrible name in many respects because no one can pronounce it. We didn't discuss that, but yeah. Myself, you can follow me on Twitter. I'm at Euler_MAB. MAB is my initials, if anyone's wondering. Yeah, and thank you for having me. It's been a great discussion.
Yes, thank you. I am embarrassed to admit that I did call it Euler for the longest time. So,
It makes sense. Yeah, I mean it's named after an 18th century Swiss mathematician, so it's
yes.
not the most it's the most not the most friendly of brandings, I have to admit.
Well, I think it's a good way to screen out your more mathematically and less mathematically inclined users. So,
It was just the name we used when we were, the hackathon we said right back at the start. It was just the
yeah.
name. It was kind of like a pub quiz, like a really nerdy team name for a pub quiz, right? You choose it for a hackathon, and then suddenly a few years later, you wake up and realize, like, wow, we actually turned that into a company, and we've got to brand this now. And yeah. Anyway, I think we kind of make fun of it a little bit, and slowly but surely, it's filtering out into the consciousness of people that it has this
Good.
unusual pronunciation.
Good. Well, once again, thank you. And thank you to everybody for listening.